Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. And today I have the honor and privilege of interviewing Rachel Cohen. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Nervous, but good.
Okay, good. It's always good to feel nervous. It means that you care. Rachel Cohen told me that. Um, okay, so first, let's start off by just telling the listeners, who are you? What do you do? Where do you live? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I am a mom of two and a dog who's kind of like my baby also. I live in Woodmere and I work as a special ed teacher for a living. I write a lot, which is more my passion. I write a lot about things in the firm world that people don't like to talk about as much, that are a little bit taboo, and I try to just bring them into the open a little bit to get the conversation rolling, so that way people don't feel as alone. Things like eating disorders or sexual abuse, things that I've experienced, that at the time that I experienced them felt very lonely about, just so that I can help others feel a little less lonely. I also advocate for women with endometriosis. So if you are listening to this and you have endometriosis, I'm more than happy to help.
Wow. So you're a teacher and also a writer.
Yeah, I like to think so.
So where do you mostly write?
So I started out on like blogs around, I don't know, like anywhere, basically online magazines, blogs. And then I started my own blog, which is where I like to keep my stuff just because I like having it in a central location. And that's basically where my stuff is right now. Every so often I will write on some online magazine or something like that still, but mostly it's all on my blog.
And people find you, like they reach out to you and ask you to write about a specific topic?
No, I kind of just write about whatever I feel like. I don't even know how many people follow me. Honestly, I don't know if anybody follows me. It's more for myself in a way, and just letting people in and letting them hear, the things that I'm thinking about. It's called Midnight Musings. So it's a lot of my musings.
Right. Totally. I heard this from, I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert. She's like a famous author.
Yeah.
And I think she has a podcast, and someone wrote it and said like she was trying to get into like this famous writing school. I don't know if there's such a thing, whatever. English, I don't know. And she's like, she didn't get accepted, and she's like, how could I be a writer if I didn't get into school for writing? And she's like, you're always a writer, or you're always an author. And I've spoken about this with other clients who like to write, and I love to write. So I totally understand. Like when you have a message that you want to get across, it's like when you're able to do that through writing.
Yes.
But
you could be like not what people would technically call a good writer and still be a writer. It's not really about, abilities necessarily.
Right. So you share openly about these things that you've struggled with: eating disorder, sexual abuse, endometriosis.
Yes.
Were you always confident or comfortable sharing, or was that like a newer thing?
I would say it's pretty new. I would say a little bit more introverted, shy by nature. And for a while, when I had endometriosis, about, I don't know, 7-10 years ago, I was feeling very alone, and people would ask me about it. And in the beginning, I would tell them just a little bit, and I would get kinds of like a little bit of backlash from my family saying like, do you really have to like share these kind of things? Like maybe it's inappropriate, or like, maybe it's just like a little too much. And the more I heard things like that, the more I realized that I needed to speak out loud, and the more I realized I needed to say more, because I just can't, like, it's exactly for that reason that people need to hear that there are other people who experience things like that. I was so lonely. And from there, I kind of just took off writing. And the more I felt comfortable sharing things with other people, the more I started talking about it. And when people would approach me and ask me to be on a podcast or ask, to write something for their online magazine or whatever, sometimes that was the point where I would start opening up about things. So it was kind of like through the writing, I became more healed, and then I was able to talk about it even more.
Because you realized how healing that was, shedding light
Exactly.
on a taboo topic.
Exactly.
So do you still get backlash from your family for sharing?
No, I mean, like my siblings really supportive, you know, one or two here and there.
Right.
But mostly everybody's really supportive.
Right. It's interesting that you're saying that, like the fact that people were like giving you pushback made your voice like a little stronger or even more
Yeah,
because you were it's interesting because I'm thinking like at least for me, like when I share, I'm always like, what are people going to say? What are people going to think? Am I oversharing? And that's
right.
like
And
for a lot of people hold them back.
right, that's usually me. It's not like if, you know, I'm always wondering what people think. I'm always worried about that. And it's something that I'm really trying to break, but it's such a hard thing to break.
Hmm.
Um, but I guess it was just in that time that I just felt like, no, like I got to get this out there. And I think that was really a growing experience for me also now that you're making me think about it. Because I'm not the person who pushes back on things, and I'm not the person who says you're saying no, so I'm saying yes.
Right.
Um, I was like the perfect child in you know, when I was little in high school, you know, the perfect kid. So I think like in my 20s when I was sick, um, and like a young mom, I think that was like my rebellious period, quote unquote.
Hmm.
And I think that's where I started, you know,
Right.
talking
Right.
about these things.
Right. But so it's like your natural for some people, like people push back and they're like, okay, well, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. But for you, it was almost like your authentic self shown through, whatever the word is, shined through, shown
I don't
through,
know.
because you were like, wow, like it just spoke to like that truth just spoke to you. Like, I need to tell my story because like this was so healing for me. I know
Yeah.
this will be healing for others.
Yes. And the more people responded positively, the more I realized um, that they wanted to see my authentic self.
Wow.
Yeah.
For sure. I love your authentic self.
Too. I love your authentic self.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the eating disorder if you're comfortable to share.
Yeah, sure.
When did that start?
So my eating disorder started in the eighth grade. I was like 13, I guess, 13, 14. It started out a little weirdly because I almost had a friend who like convinced me that I had an eating disorder. I mean, honestly, I don't remember so much, but I thought I was pretty fine with my eating. And then I had a friend who was like, oh, you know, you're so obsessed with calories and fat. I didn't remember being that way, but she would like mention everything that was in my food and all like the fat and the calories. And you know, that started me like the idea percolating in my brain a little bit. And then a different friend had lost her mom and she stopped eating. And she got a lot of attention for it. At the time, like I wouldn't admit that to anybody because I was like, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. Like I needed attention. That's why I was doing it. But um, I did. And now
Hmm.
I know, you know, when I look back and through therapy, I now know why. But, um, you know, that's really when it started. And the attention I was getting, the positive, you know, the negative attention actually, which is attention nonetheless.
Hmm.
And then from there, I found that it also was very helpful in solving certain um, emotional problems that I was dealing with. So I felt like my eating disorders help those issues.
Okay, so this is like such an important thing to almost like pull apart for listeners is that um even a destructive behavior always has like a helpful counterpart, right? That otherwise we wouldn't
Yes,
do it.
I know
And
you talk about that a lot,
right.
actually.
And the praise reinforces that whether or not it's positive, right?
Right.
So, or the attention, whether or not it's positive, like everybody likes
Hmm.
to get attention no matter what, especially somebody
Right.
who feels like they're not getting enough, even if it's totally subconscious. And especially at age 13, we don't have like a full level of self-awareness, even if we're self-aware, even if we're naturally self-aware, right?
For sure.
So you stopped eating, like you were restricting or you were feeling like
Um, Really, I just stopped.
mhm, mhm,
um, it was, I remember like the end of eighth grade, it was our Washington trip. And I just didn't eat for 3 days. And I just like, I really, excuse me, enjoyed it. Like everybody was like, oh my gosh, you know, you're not eating. What's wrong with you? Telling the teachers. It was the first time that I felt like people saw me. Um, and from there, I remember the day after the Washington trip, I came home and I walked down the stairs in the morning and I passed out like right on the floor. Um, that was like exciting for me almost.
Mhm.
Um, and from there, things progressed to getting
Exciting and
worse.
confusing, right? Because even
Oh,
from the
for sure.
expression
I'm
on your
sorry.
face,
Yes.
right, right,
Like definitely, exciting in the sense that like, I felt like I was a full-fledged eating disorder, I don't know what
right,
person,
right.
but also completely confusing and a little bit of like anger at myself almost, that like, what are you doing and why? Like, what is this about?
You were
But I didn't
curious. You
go,
were curious about why.
yeah, I was at the time, because I felt like um, there had to be a reason why I was doing it. I've always been very like intuitive and like, in a way like attached to my body. Although, I mean, like I'm sure we'll get into this, but like when I dissociated, after I was abused, but I'm sure we could either talk about it or not talk about it. But
Yeah,
there was a part of me that was very intuitive with myself, and I always wanted to know like why I was doing things. But then I kind of just assumed that it was, at that point I decided it was attention and that was it. And there was just something wrong with me that I needed so much attention.
interesting. Okay, so after this Washington trip, it was like obvious to yourself and to others that you really were struggling with
Yeah.
anorexia.
I don't necessarily know that it was like diagnosable anorexia yet, but there was definitely an eating disorder going on.
So you fainted from not eating for 3 days, and there was a part of you that
Yes.
felt really happy about it.
Yes.
Scared, confused, probably scared, curious. And then what happened?
Life went on. Somehow nobody said anything to my parents at the time in 8th grade. And then when we went to 9th grade, it kind of became like my identity almost. Like I was the girl with an eating disorder. That's all. And
Mhm,
at that point, it was basically anorexia. So
mhm,
everybody looked at me like this, Raquel is anorexia. Um, I made very close relationships with teachers that way because they were so worried about me. But at the same time, I had this like label that wasn't great. But I persisted. I lived on water and pretzels
mhm,
for a bunch of years.
mhm. And your parents didn't know this time,
No,
still didn't know.
no. Um, there's what to be said on that, but
Right.
teachers tried to tell them a bunch of times.
Mhm. And then what eventually happened? Like, were you hospitalized? Were you in therapy? Like, what happened from there?
Um, I started therapy, let's say 11th grade. That was one thing my parents did do. Um, but nobody, I don't know, it wasn't like on the forefront of people's minds that like maybe there was something like really, really wrong, that I needed to be hospitalized or I needed to be in an immune disorder clinic or something. Um, I'm not really sure why. I think there is a certain stigma that goes along with body types. And although I was very, very, very thin, I was also small as a whole. Like I'm very short. So people just saw me as like the small little girl. And
Mhm.
they figured like I was supposed to be this small. So that's like my feeling on things. And that's why they didn't worry as much. Nobody saw me without clothes on. And, you know, I was
Right.
very careful about that.
Right. So I was kind of trying to also like uncover that. Like, was it the type of thing that for some people who are struggling with anorexia, it's so obvious that they're looking for the attention. They
Right.
know it and everyone else knows it. And for some people, they really don't want people to start noticing the eating disorder because they really want to stay sick.
Right.
They don't realize that they're sick, you know?
Right. So there were certain parts of attention that I liked. It was like I almost wanted selective attention. I wanted certain people to pay attention to me, but I didn't want other people to pay attention to me. Um, yeah, I wore very baggy clothes so that most people didn't see,
Hmm.
um, and I didn't allow like the world basically to know what was going on. I say the world, I'm saying like most people in my grade or outside of those teachers that I wanted to know and my best friends, I didn't really want anybody else knowing. And I was very, very secretive and very good at keeping that secret.
Hmm. Got it. So, we didn't talk about the abuse. I don't know if we're gonna get into it, but maybe just briefly. I know that you shared a blog about that.
Yeah.
And I will just say that, at least from my perspective, I think that we're getting better in the Jewish community, shedding light on taboo topics. And it's funny because, like, I'll just say that we're in the SRC Teshuva, so I'm trying really, really hard in these 10 days not to like listen to anything like considered non-Jewish, like a podcast, like more Jewish podcast or Jewish books, whatever. And I realized, I was listening to Yemima Mizrahi last night, and I realized that the more like I pay attention to the good things in our community, the more there is, versus the more, I know that we need to fix things, of course, but there is, obviously we're trying to keep things not spoken about because we're afraid it's going to spread, or we're afraid that it's going to put a bad light on our community. But obviously that's not the truth. We need to speak about the problems in our community, whether there's a better way to do it. We don't have to blast out all of our issues, but I do think that it is important people have these experiences: eating disorder, sexual abuse, mental illness, and it is important that like someone has to talk about it,
100%.
Yeah. So I think that we could just say that that part of the eating disorder was getting attention, and part of the not eating was, do you think that it was numbing from the pain in your body from the abuse?
Definitely. That's what I wrote in the essay that I wrote on the abuse, is that I recognize the fact that having an empty stomach and the pains of an empty stomach overshadowed the pains that I felt in other areas of life, the pain of my trauma.
Right.
So that was definitely, that's why it was useful. That's another reason why it was useful to me.
Right.
Additionally, what I found was that when I did, because it was childhood sexual abuse, a lot of times what happens, and I know it happened with me, is that people who were sexually abused when they're children, they feel like they don't want to grow up in a way. And I didn't want my body to change. And I was, maybe I was worried that it would happen again, or I'm not really sure, why, but I didn't want my body to change. And I realized also, or I learned that when I didn't eat, my period stopped and my body shrunk, and I was not, as an adult physically as I had been. So that was something that also.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want this to, I guess I'll put in a trigger warning for people who are struggling. Right. But I wanted to ask you, no, it's okay. This is important. Okay. Right. I wanted to ask you that if you could reflect on the years that you were really struggling with restricting, and it was helping you in a lot of ways because you were disassociating from your body. Could you reflect and see how it was hurting you? Like, are you able to see that?
You mean like how? You mean more than physically? I'm not sure.
Yeah, more than physically. Physically, obviously, you're saying.
Oh, okay.
Even the fact that you're saying physically, you're saying that it was hurting you physically.
Okay. Yes, right? But you're right. There's definitely it's not any goodness. There's not any goodness in it, although there is a reason that it helps. It serves a purpose, as you say. Mm-hmm. But yes, I'm just thinking back on it, like it numbed me. It didn't only numb, my body, like in the sense that like I almost didn't feel my body. I was just, dissociating from it. But it numbs my brain. I didn't feel emotions at all. I didn't feel happy. I didn't even feel sad. I was just kind of going through the motions of life. I couldn't enjoy things. I couldn't enjoy, food is such a big part of the Jewish community, and eating in, with families and enjoying ourselves. Food is very important in so many ways, and socially it's important. And so when my family was eating, my friends were eating, and I would just sit there, it felt lonely. And it also felt, it was like very isolating. Like I felt like there was something that I didn't belong. And even though I so badly wanted to be able to be a part of it, at the time, I wouldn't have traded it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really I guess we're both being careful with our words, but in a way, it's like beautiful the way you're describing it, because for some people who are still in the throes of an eating disorder and they hear what you're saying, it probably is, at least they could relate to you, but at least they could see the other side of it. Because when you're in it,
Right.
that's why I said, right, like when part of my work, right, and part of the intuitive eating work, or at least the way that I use it, is that we always have to understand how the restricting or the binging or any behavior that isn't serving us is serving us in some way,
Right.
because we wouldn't be doing it
We'll
otherwise.
be doing it. Right.
And it helps with the shame and the judgment and the self criticism, because like we're, as humans, like we look for ways to help. It's just a
Right.
survival mechanism. So I think that that's always like focusing more on the positive, focusing more on like, wow, like this is the skill that you somehow developed, whether it was also really hurting you,
Right.
it was also really helping you. So, but now obviously reflecting back on it, you see how it was hurting you.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So could you walk us through like what happened, like in terms of where we were up to in terms of your teenagehood, like what happened after that with your eating?
Sure. So I would say around, well, I know for sure when it was at the end of 10th grade, I met my future husband. And there was something in the way he respected me and cared about me no matter what. And he also didn't try to shove food into me. Like that was, that's something that a lot of people do, and that makes a ton of sense.
Right.
They try to feed you, and he didn't obviously like support me in what I was doing, but he also didn't try to save me.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time that's not what we needed. But I knew that he cared about me no matter what. And what were you gonna say
I
something?
love what you said. He supported me, but he didn't try to save me. I just love the terminology.
Yeah, that's exactly what he did. And because he did that, and because of those feelings that he had for me, suddenly like my body, my mind, my body I started feeling again. And it was in a way painful. It was not in a way, it was extremely painful. But at the same time, these feelings, these positive feelings of love and just enjoyment and just, all the positive things I felt about him, it made me want to get better.
Wow.
And it wasn't like I was getting better for him. I was getting better for me so that I could be with him.
Right. Right.
And slowly but surely, 11th grade, 12th grade, I started eating more. It was a very scary process. Healing is not linear, as I always say. And there were, times where I fell back and there are times where I went forward. Because I had the issues with anorexia, when my friends went to Israel, I didn't go. I wasn't allowed to go, which was something that devastated me. But it did also give me more time to focus on getting better. So should I continue on the timeline?
Yeah. 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 I was gonna just ask you. So what happened after that?
Yeah. So I went to college. I struggled a little bit with like over exercising there for a little while, and then I got married.
Did your husband, your future husband at the time, did he go to Israel?
He went to Israel. We're the same age. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
That must have been hard. No problem. I'm also gonna take a drink.
It was extremely hard. We also agreed to only talk every Rosh Chodesh.
Mm-hmm.
Because we wanted to see what we were like without the other person. We needed to make sure that we actually wanted to be together.
Right.
It was very hard.
Yeah.
And all my friends were there.
Right. So, that must have been so hard.
Yeah. In the long run, it made me stronger because I went into college not knowing anybody. And then I went to Israel the year after and I didn't know anyone. And it brought me out of my shell a little bit because I had to meet new people. I didn't have the comfort of my friends anymore.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Neve. Oh, sorry, to college. I went to Stern for one semester and then I went to Queens.
Got it.
And then I went to, before I went to Queens College, I went to Neve for 4 months.
Oh, that's so nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also went to Neve. Did we talk about that? I went to Neve one summer.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Summer
no.
program.
I didn't know
I
that.
went to Tomar Deborah for seminary, and I went to Neve the following summer for like, they call it like Neve buffet. Like I just went to like all the classes.
Isn't it the best?
Amazing. I loved it. I loved it.
Such a
It
good
was so much fun.
experience.
Yeah, it was amazing. I wish I could. I always talk about it now. Like, should I go back for a week? You know?
I wish. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. I would love to go. I really would. Okay, so you got to go. Okay, so you got married. So you went to Stern, you went to Queens, and then you went to Israel.
Right. And then we got engaged in Israel.
Mhm.
Because Ellie was there. Ellie, my future husband, was there for Shana Bet. And after 4 months, I went home to kind of get ready to get married, and Ellie stayed. And when he came back in like Mayish time, and we got married in June.
That's so cute.
So, super fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys know each other for a long time.
Yeah.
And then is that when like the eating disorder acted up again, or you were doing well? Like, how did that go?
Um, for a while, I did well. Um, I was definitely in a better place. And once, I would say, once I started, okay, I'll just give a little bit of background that when I got married, I started having flashbacks of what had happened to me with the abuse when I was younger. And because of that, it brought me to a very bad place again. And I definitely went back in terms of my eating,
Mhm.
because it's easy to fall back into patterns like that
Right.
because it did once
You're
comfort
coping.
us.
It's your coping,
Yeah,
right?
it's a coping mechanism, exactly. So I struggled with that, but I also knew that I really, really wanted to have kids.
Right.
So, and I knew that in high school I wouldn't have been able to have kids. So that was something that I needed to keep in mind. And so it actually did stop me from going too far into the anorexia again.
Right. I want to just say here for people who are confused about this, I feel like I say this every single day, but I'll just say it for people who don't know that when it comes to eating disorder, your body is going to hold on to the things that are most important for survival, not for having kids, not for anything else, but survival. So like if like for people who are struggling with anorexia, they sometimes have like cold extremities. Like your body doesn't need your extremities to live, but it does need your heart, and it needs all your vital organs to live. So that's why the blood supply will come more into the middle of your body for your more vital organs. So the same thing with getting your period. You don't need to have your period in order to survive. You need your period to get pregnant and to maintain life.
Right.
But you definitely don't need it to survive. So for people who are listening, that's like a very important thing, that you're eating enough and that you're getting your period, because your body wants to be your body knows that if you're able to support life or not, which is really cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that was a motivator for you.
Yes, that was the motivator for me at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you never were working with like a dietitian to tell you like how much you needed to eat or anything like that?
Really, no. um I think in 11th grade, I went to an eating disorder clinic once or twice, and they kind of evaluated me and they told me that I needed to be a certain weight. And then I never went back again. And I'm not really sure what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, I didn't go to a dietitian until years after I had kids.
Do you think, like looking back on this, tell me if this is like triggering to think, but do you think like in that time when like we already had something like sparked, like you wanted to gain weight to be able to get pregnant, do you think that if the treatment would have been like, obviously like that's only a motivating factor when it's happening, but then when the motivating factor goes away, like you're not better, right?
Right.
So do you think that would have helped you, or you just don't know?
And like you're saying, when I was younger,
at that time, like when you like a lot of times I'm looking like for a motivator for somebody to eat, like let's say
right? Yeah.
getting pregnant. That's like
Yeah.
something that would really help spark the treatment. It wouldn't treat it though, because once the motivator is gone, the person's still most of the time struggling.
Right, exactly. So that's exactly what happens with me.
Right.
So yeah, so yes, had it, um, I definitely think it would have been a good motivator for me. Like you're saying in the past, right? That's what you're asking. I'm
Yeah. I'm
sorry.
saying like,
Yeah.
yeah, like if somebody would have told you
Um,
need X amount of, carbs, protein, fat, this is going to sustain you, like checking on you, encouraging you, like that would
oh,
be
that's what you meant. I'm
yes.
sorry. Okay. I get it. No, I think that would have made things worse at the
You think
time.
so? Why?
Yes. Um, because when they focus, maybe like you need to eat a certain amount of this and this and this wouldn't have been too bad, like a little bit of a meal plan, but anything really rigid or like you have to eat this, very specific, like a handful of this, and then um, that would that brings in like all sorts of control issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have made things worse. Like when I say control issues, I'm saying like I would have felt like it needs to be exactly what they tell me to do.
Right.
And so I think that really would have brought up other like, excuse me, other struggles that
People
I had.
trying to control you, or things
Yeah,
trying to control you, or
yeah,
you trying to control yourself.
exactly.
Got it.
All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah, I get it. Okay, so you were able to have two kids, Baruch Hashem. They're so
With the
cute.
grace of
We used to be
Hashem. Yes, thank
neighbors.
you.
Let's just,
Yes,
like
we
tell
shared the
everyone.
same house.
We shared the same house back in the day, probably like 6 years ago.
It wasn't even that long ago. Yeah, it
Right.
was like 6, 7 years ago,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. It's funny how these things
Yes,
work out, years later.
that's funny.
Yeah. So, Baruch Hashem, we were able to have two kids. So then after you had your children, you fell back into the eating disorder. Like, how did that happen?
I didn't really have time to do that because at that point I got sick. I started having terrible pain right after, during my pregnancy with my son. And from there became the whole journey that I had with endometriosis. I couldn't focus on anything at the time besides the pain that I was in. But actually, because I wasn't focusing on it, and because I'm gonna rewind a second. It's not because I wasn't focusing on it. Because the rest of my sentence was going to be I started gaining weight. But that's not true. It's not just that because I'm not focusing on my eating disorder, I'm going to start, gaining too much weight. It's not about that. But what I would say is that, that I just didn't have time, period. I just did not have time to think about eating, not eating. I was like trying to survive with my pain.
Right. And at that time, you didn't know what you had.
Right. For a good 10 years, nobody knew what was going on.
Wow.
Yeah. Starting from when I was like a teenager, actually, nobody knew why the symptoms were happening. Yeah.
What is endometriosis?
So it's basically when something that's very similar to the lining of the uterus grows on the wrong parts of the body. And it makes lesions and cysts and can give you tremendous pain, all sorts of symptoms. It's a very, very difficult disease to deal with. Technically, there is no cure. And there are ways to get the endometriosis out of your body, but I won't go into them. If you do have issues, though, anybody can ask me. That's basically the gist of it.
How did you get the diagnosis? Do you mind me asking you?
No, not at all. It took a while, a lot of doctors. One doctor told me that he thought, it was the first time I'd ever heard of the word, that he thought maybe I had endometriosis. And he was well-meaning, but he wasn't a specialist. He went inside me, he did a laparoscopic procedure, and he did find some endometriosis, enough to be diagnosed as having it, which was a big relief for me, just to know that it wasn't all in my head. But at the same time, he was not able to get it all out because he didn't really know that you have to be a specialist in order to do this. He didn't know the correct surgery that needs to be done for it. but that was my first diagnosis. And I have to tell you, it was one of the biggest reliefs in my life to know
For
that
sure.
I wasn't making it all up.
Right. Yeah. Part of you thought like, oh, I'm just making it up. Like this pain is like, there's no diagnosis. It's just in my head.
Yeah. It wasn't just me. It was all the doctors telling me that it was all in my head, my family, my doctors, everybody. And eventually I believed it.
That's so sad.
It's crazy. Yeah. It
I have
was
to
a
take a
really
minute
terrible
to, I have
time.
to take a minute to sit with. Wow. It's hard because a lot of time, at least like what I see and believe is that a lot of times we do have emotional pain that is manifesting in our body that we don't want to address.
That's right.
So it does make sense that people say that, think that, but at the same time, it's like, how could you tell someone it's in your head? How could you do that?
Right.
I don't
It
know.
definitely does make sense to a degree. I mean, pain, you know, our bodies and our minds are so connected.
Right.
And it wasn't, when people said that to me in the beginning, it wasn't such a big deal. Because I was like, yeah, you know, maybe it is. They would tell me that like maybe it was because I had trauma in the past that I was
Right.
feeling pain. Okay,
Right.
that's possible. But when
Right.
doctors are telling me that instead of trying to find a diagnosis, you know, that's when it gets
Right.
not such a
Like
great
you
time.
shouldn't really give up until like you really turned every stone.
Right, exactly. Once you've exhausted all the possibilities, then you can start talking about maybe it's a mental thing, or you could do both at the same time,
Right.
but just
Right.
don't let it be instead of.
Right. Don't live in pain. Like no one has to live like that.
No, nobody should ever live like that. And I wouldn't wish endometriosis on my worst enemy.
Right. So after you had a procedure, you like, are you still struggling with chronic pain? Like, how does that manifest now?
So I struggled for many years before I found a specialist in Atlanta who did the proper surgery on me called excision surgery, where they actually get out the root of the endometriosis. And once that was done, I remember he told me in 6 weeks, you're going to start to feel better. And 6 weeks on the dot, I started having no pain for the first time in 10, 15 years. It was unbelievable.
That is crazy.
It was the biggest bracha. I can't even tell you. I can still feel it. Like that moment where I was like, where I woke up and I was like, I don't have pain right now. It was
So crazy.
yeah.
So now you don't struggle with any pain?
No, I have no pain. Throughout the process, I did unfortunately have a hysterectomy. It is very much not a cure for endometriosis, but it was one of the things that a well-meaning doctor who didn't really know what was going on convinced me it would, you know, that it would help the endometriosis. So because I had the hysterectomy and because I had the excision surgery, it's very, very rare that endometriosis would grow again in my body.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just repeat again, hysterectomy is not a cure for endometriosis in any way, shape, or form.
Right. I'm so sorry. I'm really
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a long haul.
Yeah. It's just like so painful. Are you comfortable to share with like the audience, like how you're doing now with your eating?
Sure. Okay.
And also I want to hear, like, if you're comfortable to share also like how you became interested in intuitive eating, like how you learned about that.
Yeah. So when I was sick, I gained a lot of weight because of a lot of different medications that I was on, and because I wasn't moving at all. I was on the couch for years. And at the time, once I felt better, I felt like the weight, I had no idea about intuitive eating at the time, health and exercise, body appreciation or acceptance, positivity. At the time, all I knew was that it was the last reminder of having endo. So it was like I had to get rid of it because I had to be done. I had to be back to where I was before I started with the endometriosis.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, now I know that when you go through something like that, you never go back to who you were. You become a new person.
Right.
But besides that, I recognize the fact that losing weight is not everything, and certainly being thinner was not going to make me happier or feel like I had closed out my trauma anymore.
Right. It's interesting that I mean, now we're like analyzing and over analyzing your life, but I'm saying that I guess from my perspective, listening to this story, it's like that's like what we call like a limiting belief or an automatic negative thought, right? Like you had,
Right.
for some reason, for maybe or maybe you don't know, that you had a belief that the weight was a representation of your illness.
Right.
And if you lost the weight, you would almost like lose the past or the history of your illness.
I think I was hoping for that. Yeah. Yeah. And that is like, it was a thought that came into my mind for so many, like for a bunch of years, really. Just like that automatic, like you said, it just would come into my mind constantly. Like, you got to lose that weight.
Right.
The last piece of your, of your sickness.
Right. So then how did you learn about intuitive eating?
So I'm trying to remember. I want to say it's from you, Gila. I think I started, yeah, I think, yeah, I started following you, and we had spoken, and like,
so happy to hear that.
Yeah, no, for real. Now that I think about it, I'm sorry I haven't thanked you for it in the past, but it didn't even occur to me until now.
I'm so happy that people like are learning from the content, you never know, like reading it.
Yeah. Oh, people are learning. And I remember, I think I posted on like Facebook one time for you, like a Facebook group, and I was wondering like, what is intuitive eating? I was like curious about it. I started to read up on it. I started following more people on like social media who talk about intuitive eating. And I read the book, and I realized that it was something that was going to free me from the shackles of dieting and the shackles of needing to lose weight.
After, like you said, the thought like, I need to lose this weight, I need to lose this weight, were you actively trying to lose the weight? Were you like going back to restricting, dieting? Like, what was going on for you?
I tried restricting, nothing was working. And I convinced myself that I was a failed anorexic, which is another one of those very erroneous thoughts. First of all, the fact that I've learned from you that they're both sides of the same spectrum. They're both different sides of the same spectrum. Eating too much, binge eating, I would say, and anorexia and restricting. But sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No problem.
What were we just saying? So
you said you were a failed anorexic, and you're like, that was like, you realized that was also like an erroneous thought.
Right. And from there, I was, the doctors told me that it would be a good idea to get a lap band. So I tried the lap band route.
Which doctors told you that? I'm just curious.
Those were actually
not the names of the doctors, but I'm saying like, you were still going back to like, let's say, follow up about your endometriosis. Like, where did that come in?
Yeah, so actually, I was in the throes of endometriosis when the doctors told me to get a lap band. They told me that if I would lose weight, it would make the endometriosis go away. So I tried that. It was not a very smart move on their part to convince me of that. And it wasn't, it was just not a good idea, because my body was in so much trauma that, first of all, it wouldn't have helped me. And it didn't make me lose any weight. But even if it did, it was dangerous for me and unhealthy in every way. So that was just another, I had it removed eventually. So that was another way that I had tried to lose weight. Just active dieting. I used to say, I wish I had a sign that I could put on me saying, it's not my fault I'm fat. If you can believe it. Because we feel like we have to. I can believe
it. I've heard people say like, I wish I could just unzip my fat too.
Yeah, like we feel like we have to prove to the world that like, we're told that there's something wrong with it, to the point where we have to prove that like, oh, it's not my fault that I'm this way.
Right. Because the world like looks at people who are in larger bodies and like, oh, they're lazy, it's their fault, they're eating a certain way, and it's like, no, bodies change, like bodies
Yeah.
gain weight, lose weight all the time from like so many things that are not in our control at all.
Right. For sure.
It's just
So
really, it's
yeah.
unfortunate. Like, thank you for shedding light on that for sure. And I think that a little bit like the health at every size movement is like helping, that narrative that like so much of the world talks about like prejudice and like, racism, and like people who are in larger bodies are also like they're still judged. They're still, whatever,
100%.
discriminated
Yes.
against. It's horrible.
Yes. It's in so many ways. I'm like
Right.
listening to Maintenance Phase now, and it's like you learn so much about it's a podcast. Have you ever
No,
listened to it?
what is that?
Oh my gosh, Gila, it's amazing. Do you know who Aubrey Gordon is?
No.
She goes
Tell
by
me.
Your Fat Friend on Instagram.
Okay.
She is incredible, and she's a beautiful writer, and she has this podcast called Maintenance Phase, and they talk about everything. They talk about BMI, BMI scale. They talk about all these different fad diets. They talk about the obesity epidemic. They talk about whatever, so many things. So I learned a lot about fat phobia, or as they call it, anti-fat bias, from them.
So interesting. It's so important. By the way, I just want to say
important.
for like who's ever listening and is like learning about intuitive eating, struggling with intuitive eating, whatever, like I always say that, like, think about it, years and years and years you were like struggling with anorexia or struggling with restriction or believing that like that was still like a good thing. Being so skinny was probably praised, and like then you learn about intuitive eating, and then like let's say some people do like 1 or 2 sessions with me, or they just follow me, or they follow other intuitive eating dietitians, and they're like, I don't know, I just still want to diet. I'm like, of course you still want to diet. You've been dieting for 30 years. One
Right. It
podcast
doesn't
isn't
just
going to
go
change.
away.
So, like,
Yeah.
yeah, listen to podcasts, like educate yourself, like, and like you said, like when you read the book, you were like, this is my freedom. Like, it is your freedom, and like hold on to that, because like you don't have to stay stuck in, none of us have to stay stuck in like what diet culture kind of like convinces us that we have to stay stuck in.
Yes. Yes. It's hard when you have, let's say, family or friends who are trying to convince you otherwise, or who you have to like fight with to try to convince them. After a while, you realize that you're not going to be able to convince the world, not even necessarily your family, and you just need to focus on yourself and focus on, doing the work yourself.
Right. I feel like also it's important to know that like that's a really important boundary when it comes to like convincing people about intuitive eating. Like, I think that everyone could heal differently. I don't think that I happen to think intuitive eating could help anyone, but I also think that people have a really serious block to it because of the world that we live in. And like, I think we all have to like acknowledge that and just be okay with that. And we don't, part of like fighting with people trying to convince them is like such an energy suck for us. Like, it's so important to have a boundary that like, okay, they don't know why I'm doing this. Like, they're seeing me eat a piece of cheesecake and they're judging me, and like that's them and this is me. It's so hard, but it's so important.
Yeah, and that literally circles back to the beginning when we were talking about caring about what other people think of us.
Right.
Like, we need to say, listen, I'm not going to care what they think, because I know what I'm doing is good for me.
Right. And that's, I guess, part of like life is that we don't, it's just like we look at someone and we like kind of like naturally judge them. We're like, we don't know the whole picture. They don't know the whole picture. And like, it's just the way it is. Like, we just don't always know the whole picture.
Right. Exactly.
So I wanna like sort of wrap up, but I want to know like if you're comfortable to share with the audience, like how you feel like you're doing now, and maybe there's something I could help you with today.
I mean, that I still struggle with a lot of his body trust we've spoken about, trusting my body, believing that it's important no matter what I've eaten the day before, no matter what I weigh, it's important to eat no matter what. For me, it's about learning to nourish, realize that food is nourishing for us, and food is life.
Right.
And what's something that we're working on is just, we had spoken about eating in public, which is something that's very hard for me.
Right.
So there's always the struggle. I mean, like I said, healing isn't linear, and it's a process. So, and I have to convince myself of that sometimes because it's hard.
Right. So So eating in public is something that's like very triggering for you.
Yes,
So
very much.
let's say somebody, I'm sure somebody listening to this could relate. I could relate. What are like one or two things that have helped you?
I want to say that I'm at the point where something has helped me. Is it okay that I say that I'm not?
Of course.
I'm not there yet where I found something that helps me. I'm not at the point yet where I feel comfortable really eating in public. But that's something that I'm really, really hoping to get to. Like,
Thank you for your honesty. Could you, I guess, I know that you're very open and I think it's probably so healing for people to hear. Could we go there? Like, what comes up for you when you think of like a moment when you were trying to eat in public or when you have to eat in public or the anxiety around that? Like, what's so scary about it?
I close my eyes for a second and kind
Of
of
course, go
go
there.
inside myself.
Yep.
Um, I think overall it's just this fear of being judged. Because I'm such a harsh, critic of myself. I worry that other people are judging me just as strongly.
Mhm.
And the need to appear perfect. So I feel like when people are judging me and they're saying, which in my brain, people are saying to me like, oh my gosh, she's so fat, she doesn't deserve to be eating that, or something like that, which I know they're probably not saying. It's usually me who's saying it. But when I just, I think it's just that like that fear of being judged.
Does that fear of being judged come up like in a lot of places in your life, not just with your eating?
Um, Good question. I'm not sure.
You can think about it. You can let me know.
Let me think about it for a second. Um, yes, I would say yes.
Okay, so it's like this is more like your pattern that like in general, like maybe we could call it social anxiety, or we could call it like just wanting to please people, wanting to be good. Like
Right,
you said, I heard you
right,
say that a lot of times I was always the perfect girl. I was always so good, people
right.
pleasing, doing what people expect of you. So that
Yeah,
just manifests with your eating also.
yes, definitely,
Do you feel like it's
definitely.
a handicap for you? Like, do you feel like you want to be able to eat in public or not so much?
Yes. No, I definitely want to. I That's like one of the things I've been wanting to do for so long, or like be able to eat at a kiddish. Like
Right,
I know most people have trouble with that just because it's hard to like balance the food
right,
on your lap and it feels
right,
awkward.
right,
But like just the thought of like going to people's house for lunch on Shabbos and like not picking at my food or not putting salad on my plate and that's it. Like
right,
it
right.
sounds so enjoyable.
Right. When you look at other people eating and like whether they're in a small body or a large body, do you feel judgment towards them?
Never.
No.
Never. That's the thing. I always tell my friends and just anybody, like I am the least judgmental person you'll ever meet for other people,
Right. I
like not
wonder if
myself.
this, I find it to be helpful that like when you're in the moment or even before you go to a situation where you might have to eat in public, like watching like your daughter eat, watching her enjoying the
Hmm.
food, you know, watching
Yes.
yourself as like your earliest childhood memory, like when you were happy around food, watching yourself enjoying the food in your head, like what would that feel like? What would that be like? You know, just because like it's so hard. It is so hard. It's so triggering, and there's so much history for you around your body, around food. Like we can't like deny that, but I just feel like, especially to remember that like when your value system is that when you're around people eating, you don't think anything. Like there's no judgment. So like even if someone else thinks something about you, which they're probably not, it's really them, not you, because your true self like doesn't really eat, don't eat, whatever works, you know?
Right. I really like that idea of imagining, like my watching my daughter eat or imagining that, because when I think about like what would I want, if my child ever came to me and said, I really just don't want to eat in public, like my heart would hurt for them.
Right,
And yeah, just seeing how nourishing food is for my children,
right,
I think can really help me there.
Right. I love
That's a
that
good
you're
idea.
using the word nourishing, and like that you said food is life, because like we say that in Judaism, right? Like food, if we didn't eat, like our neshama would leave our body. That's how we
Right.
glue ourselves to our neshama, right? So like, yes, so many of us struggle with these negative feelings towards food, but like that's why I said like watching your child eat, like who doesn't love, like as a mother, like making a good dinner and like just
Oh
watching
my
their kids
gosh.
enjoy it,
Yes.
whether it's like, whole wheat pasta um or like, fried mac and cheese balls. Like it doesn't matter like
Right.
what the food is. It's just like they're eating it,
Exactly.
they're relishing it, they're smelling it, they
Yes.
like it, and they
I
move on.
love feeding people. Yes,
Yeah,
specifically my kids.
yeah,
Yes.
yes, yes. Okay, so let's I think we're gonna end, but if is there something you want to leave the listeners with? Where can they find you? What's your name on Instagram?
I will tell you that. I just want to say one thing very quickly. I want to make sure that anybody who listens knows that it wasn't like, it doesn't, I feel like I made it sound too easy that I healed from eating disorder. Like I was like, oh yeah, I met my husband and,
Right, right.
I just got better. But like anybody who is struggling, like I want you to know that I'm with you, and that I know that it is not an easy thing to get better from it.
No,
So I just wanted to, make sure that people hear that.
100%. And even just to remember that this was an hour-long conversation of like,
Right.
30 plus years. So
Right. Exactly.
there's ups and downs,
Exactly.
and it's not linear, and you're still healing, and we're all still
Right.
healing.
Exactly. Exactly. So my Instagram is Rachel Cohen, Rachel
Underscore.
underscore DAAR underscore COHEN. And my blog is Midnight Musings. It's like one of those free Wix sites. So it's a very long, strange, address, but like if you look up Midnight Musings and you write my name in, you should find it.
I'll put everything in the show notes so people can find you.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
Okay,
Sheila.
thank you. This was so great. Thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.